This is day one, part one of the killer dentist murder trial. If you have not been following the case, I'm going to give you a quick recap. As always, please, major trigger warning. This is Dr. Suzanne Miracle. He is actually facing murder charges for allegedly taking the life of her boyfriend, James David Barron, in March of 2025. Now, she was actually a prominent dentist with a very successful practice in St. Simon's Island prior to her arrest. Let's go into the prosecution's opening statements. She opens up with showing this picture, stating that this is James David Barron. He goes by David, so they are going to refer to him as David throughout the entire trial. He was just 68 years old when his life tragically came to an end at the hands of Suzanne, his girlfriend, when she became unhinged and shot him in a fit of rage. David and Suzanne actually began dating back in 2019. It was a quick relationship. They eventually reconnected over the years and picked up their relationship in 2024. She once again reiterates that she was a dentist, and then he was actually an executive for a company that did construction for airports. He has 2 adult children. At the time of his death, he had 3 grandchildren. Now he has a total of 5 grandchildren. When they reconnected again in spring of 2024, they began dating at a much faster pace. They went on vacation together with his family. And in October, they ended up buying a house together, October 2024, on Lake Lanier. The defendants continued her practice in St. Simon's Island, but the purpose was that she was going to retire, live at the lake house with David. On March 7th of 2025, things became a little intense. They had a good day. They had gone to the Olive Garden. They were settling in their new home, unpacking boxes. However, we don't know specifically what led up to the events, but what the evidence is going to show that our early morning hours of March 8th, she had became aware that David had remained in contact with a woman from his past, Lilia, who she thought was from Romania, but she actually lives in Moldova. David had been sending her money. She said, the defendant understandably was upset about that. But at this point, it became an obsession. They ended up arguing. On the night of March 7th, physical evidence is going to show that David retreated, went upstairs to the guest bedroom, closed the door and locked it behind him. At this point, the evidence will then show that she went upstairs after grabbing her gun, fired into the door. Where David was standing behind the door, she fired with a Glock 9mm. Now, David apparently was kind of holding himself to the side of the door in a defensive position. The bullet ends up hitting him in the left arm, slightly above the elbow. So at this point, when this happens, she, of course, hears the impact. She hears that David makes a noise like he fell. Immediately, she goes to run to the garage. It's a hammer. Hammered holes into the door until she could reach it to unlock the door. Once she unlocks the door, at this point, she is seeing what's happening. But instead of helping him, instead of rendering aid or trying to resuscitate him, she goes into damage control. She gets his Beretta. She puts it in a position on the floor. It seems that it accidentally goes off because she's not familiar with it. And the fire that, goes off on the gun ends up going out into the foyer of the home, hitting a metal baluster, a wood banister. At this point, it hits the wall and nicks it. Based on the evidence, a shot went all the way up through the glass. The projectile was never found. At this point, she takes out David's gun. She throws a holster on the bed. She started cleaning everything, starts wiping off the blood. She then takes the shell casings that came from both guns, flushes them. Now, they were actually able to recover it in the septic line. Finally, after doing all of this, she then proceeds to call 911. She doesn't give him a lot of information about what's going on, but she ends up hanging up after a minute or two and trying to call her sister. Her sister doesn't call. Her sister doesn't answer. So within 6 minutes about later, after making that first 911 call, she then calls 911. Now, when 911 arrives or the police arrive, they make it clear she's not outside waiting on the steps. She is anxious. In fact, she is upstairs wiping up the blood with the towels. Okay? Because of that, she is being charged with malice murder. They start continuing to list all of the charges that she has. She has 2 counts of felony murder because at this point she committed 2 felonies when she took his life. Then they continue with the fact that She's charged with aggravated assault because she used a deadly weapon and fired through the direction of James. And the second felony count is criminal damage in the first degree. Of course, she's charged with tampering with evidence because she flushed down the casings. Now, they then bring up the fact that the first deputy that arrives, he was responding to this scene. He says that he came up and it was really dark. They're going to interview him throughout of course, the trial, but he shares in his testimony that it was lit up inside, and so the deputies started shining their flashlights into the door. He goes around to the side of the house and starts pounding and pounding, but she would not come to the door. He then sees through the foyer window that she is in the bedroom, crouching down, appearing to be doing something. At this point, he goes ahead and goes inside. They are going to play that entire video of his arrival. They played it during opening statements. We can't see it. The TV is just too far away. So at this point, they go inside and they're concerned. It's two deputies, and one of the deputies' job is to make sure, right, nobody's touching the scene. She's not tampering with evidence. Now, one of the deputies is Deputy Thomas. She starts telling him, he grabbed my neck. He grabbed my neck. He made me go upstairs. He tried to shoot me. I got dragged down the stairs. That's when I got my gun. And she goes on to say that they got into a fight a couple of weeks previously. She decided to drive home. She ends up getting a DUI. Again, they have no idea why she's bringing that up. But at that point, she then shares that when she was dragged, he said he was going to kill me. I told him I've been drinking too much. He shoved the gun down my throat. I was desperate. I tried to shoot the doorknob off in the lock. And apparently that's what she keeps repeating. I was just trying to shoot the doorknob off. Now, when they start interviewing her at the police station, she has multiple inconsistencies in her statement, but she does say that they would argue a lot and never got to this point where he was trying to take her life. This all began, apparently, all of their issues December 28th of 2024. Apparently, that's the day that she finds out that he is having contact with Lilia. She confronts him. He wanted to leave. She wouldn't let him. And she even took his car keys and actually points a gun to him. Finally gave him the car keys and he left and he stayed at a hotel. Then on January 4th, the defendant becomes upset because she found out that he continued sending her money. That is when they got into an argument about that situation. He then again retreats and goes to a hotel. February 1st, he goes to visit her at St. Simon's Island. They go out to dinner, end up getting in a fight. Why? Again, Lilia. Apparently they were yelling at dinner. They weren't even yelling at the condo where they were staying. Actually, the police ended up coming out. According to them, he was trying to leave. David was trying to leave. She wouldn't let him leave. He wanted to get inside and get her things, but she wouldn't let him get inside. Finally, police talked to both and was like, okay, you need to let him in. In the incident, though, they did write that when he was trying to get his things, she was pushing against the door. And when he pushed the door open, she fell over and hit her head. That is why the police showed up, but they did determine that it was in fact an accident. Now, according to her reports, the cause of his death was a gunshot wound of the torso in the upper extremity. Of course, the manner is homicide. She is hoping that the jury finds her guilty. They had a horrible, toxic relationship, but she was completely obsessed with the fact that he was still in contact, apparently, with someone that he knew from Moldova. And that is why she decided to take his life that night. In the next video, I will go into the defense's opening statements. Talk to you soon.